Welcome to the second workgroup update. It's on the automotive workgroup, and we'll see basically similar topics following the flow to get an idea on the goal, a little bit of introduction, what we've achieved, challenges, a little fails, so what are the hard times which we have, the current focus and the current activities, and what we plan for 2024. Starting with the introduction, so the overall goal was set quite at the beginning, 2019, and more or less already, is discuss the conditions and prerequisite the automotive sector needs to integrate Linux into safety critical system. And we want to focus on actual use cases from the automotive domain to derive the technical requirements to the kernel, development process, so everything around this. This was basically also where we started with, and we saw that there is a lot of interest from automotive and also, again, people joining from the automotive field, but getting the first on board and having good use case, this is a more challenging part because similar like the aerospace Steve mentioned, there's a lot of proprietary content in there, IP concerns. This is an environment which we're continuously operating. And for this, we started also to have a closer collaboration with AGL, because with the automotive grade Linux, there's much more in the open, there's less concerns, much better chance to share. This led to positive outcomes and also added additional challenges. So you'll see about this in the coming sections. One of the very good milestones which we had and achievements was directly at the beginning of the year. We handed out a one-pager for the automotive grade Linux booth at the CES. It was turned out that there are many people asking for functional safety, how this is getting approached for AGL, and there was good explanations from the people, but it was never really that there was something to hand out. So there was a large set printed of the one-pager, and this is something then which followed on the embedded world, where it also was well received. So it was more an overview of all activities, but driven by the automotive part. Another nice thing which we had was a panel with the Eclipse software-defined vehicle at an Exeter symposium. This was giving more overview on open source and automotive and safety criticality to more the safety people involved. So going more, as we have many presentations at open source conferences, was more on the safety focused conference. What I really like a lot, and it's maybe even useful not only for the ELISA work, but also outside, is our reproducible CI setup. Actually, I had a nice discussion on Plumbers where someone said, oh, I waited exactly for this to have such a setup. So I spent also a few more slides on this. We have daily tested builds, downloadable images. We have the SBOM generation for all the Yocto parts in there. And then what I also still like to see is that when we take our workshops on site, there's a really large set and participation from automotive companies, new companies joining, also non-member companies who say that's good what they see, that the direction they are happy about, they learn good things. So this I really appreciate. I think it's a good feedback. And therefore, we also had a lot of material created during the workshops outside and webinars, which are automotive centric or bring strong benefits to automotive. 3 topics underlined here are the ones which I gave a few details about. So the one page is maybe the short part. It just looks like this. And the nice thing about the one pager is that it actually has 2 pages. We still call it one pager. And it gives you just the high level idea of our mission and process, but also you can get an overview how systems are composition, which elements are in there, members, and so on. And the latest version was also distributed again last week at CES. So I'm still waiting for the feedback from AGL community, but at least that's where we came from. Another thing which shows with the cross collaboration, and it works to the collaboration of work groups and has relation to the CI, is that in the medical devices work group, there were workload tracing described. This went upstream on a general case, and it's what there to analyze how are Linux subsystems, how are system calls used by workloads. And we thought that's a good idea to also analyze in the automotive work group. So we added this part and just check that our reproduction was using the generic example of stress on G, not really on the workload, results in some part that's enabled and got into the CI. So it was a very nice thing. I'm pretty sure we hear a little bit in the medical at the next session. Yeah. I don't know why this one comes in the middle. I guess because I have the long part about the CI. But what we really had as some challenges and fails in there was that automotive business remains a very conservative intellectual property driven business. So we can see this by getting a use case, by providing design architecture laws, and this is where we still could speed up our activities quite a lot. We currently see also how we can make use of other communities, how to set a wider context to get the use cases there. And it's really about finding the right balance because our original use case with the instrument cluster, which are basically represent the warning signs in the car, like the ABS, brake, and other parts, gear indicator. This is a very well analyzable use case. It gives a recent complexity, but it also brings a lower attractiveness because people would like to see driving cars autonomously, driving trucks autonomously, and by this they look into much different use cases than just seeing instrument cluster. Nevertheless, it can be a way forward. I also have this in the slides later, uh, and show it directly on the next one on the Meta ELISA CI part. So the AGL instrument cluster, for those who haven't seen it, we have a QEMU version of it, which makes it easy for us to use it directly. You don't need a hardware for anything. And it's Qt based. We haven't made the parse to Flutter. So if someone is willing to bring this to Flutter to the latest version of AGL, feel free to support. But for now, it's still on the Qt base because it's enough to analyze systems below. And yeah, the main difference is that we added this danger sign in there. It's not like a real system would work on, but we just brought things in to illustrate that the telltale monitoring works and does something. This is all documented in the CI, so you can take a look at the Meta ELISA, at the Meta layer for the Octo build. It gives a description, also how to build, and we brought this then into a GitLab. So the sources are on GitHub, but the actual CI runs on GitLab. It runs on a daily base. We check there and you see at the right side there is this downloadable image part. If you go one day back, I mean, in the push package, there's nothing anyway, but we only keep the latest version of that day, which means whenever change get in, you will see this. And it's more about the build artifacts, less on the boot items, but it's where you can just check results and we make sure that it works every day and you get fresh images if there's a PR or so getting updated. You will have the latest source at hand and it makes also the reproduction easier. This was a strong lessons learned during our discussions. The way to get in is that you really can build plain and native from source. If you have issues because you maybe use an OpenSUSE tumbleweed rather than a Debian or Ubuntu or whatever you have, and something is different from your environment to what AGL maybe expect as a standard environment, your chance is open to use a Docker container. And then if your build machine is not powerful enough, well, you can also just go and do cache build because Yocto build typically takes a lot of time and a lot of computing resources. So you can modify your local conf. We have a shared S state. We rebuild the S state once a week to make sure that also the S state generation still works. And well, this is a good start. And maybe if you are not interested at all and you just want to see the demo running, maybe check how to get in, how workloads are configured, do the workload strategy, S-trace testing. You can also download the binaries. You have instructions there and just get the thing started. Right. I briefly mentioned the SBOM part already. This is quite easy. We have enabled the inherit create SPDX. And to get it a little more readable, we have an SPDX pretty for the mid in there. And also the results are prepared as an own pipeline. So you haven't seen it in the jobs, but there is an own pipeline which is generating SBOMs. And also there you can then see the SBOM as an artifact, a build artifact. Uh, a lot of thanks to Sudeep, who did a lot of work on this CI activities. So he's the main person and active from the tools work group on the CI parts and takes all the inputs we provide as documentation from the automotive as well as from the systems group. And if you want to read the full story, there's the blog description which describes more motivation on this. One thing to highlight is I told we start with the meta ELISA and there's really dependency flow. So description from meta ELISA and the source are taken into the Docker file. The Docker file create the Docker images created on the GitLab, and the GitLab actually pulls this Docker image, which is available as download based on the Docker file, which is available as download, to generate the image, the QEMU image, and bring this into OpenQA for testing. Which means when something changed in this queue from the beginning to the end, we potentially see a OpenQA test failing. And we observed this twice, actually, in the past. Typically, when someone goes to vacation, I don't know why it always happens when someone goes to vacation, but what we, for example, identify was that the system still boots properly, but the certificates for the CAN message broker from the cooksys stack, this was expired, and therefore we couldn't get the CAN message, and then also the danger sign was not displayed, and this led to failing test cases. Took us a little bit of time to debug, but it really shows when something goes and changes in the flow, we are able to detect it. And that's a very nice benefit, so that when you pick up at one of these stages, you can be sure that it had worked last night. Right. And what we currently do, we set the CI up, it's running constantly, you can improve this. We saw that the use case was not as attractive for everybody, and there's a large stream in the software-defined vehicle initiatives. We're still reaching also therefore all to the Eclipse SDV, where's the joint panel. We reached out also to other initiatives like Sophie, and we continue on this currently, jump in and see where we fit. And then we really look for a new use case, maybe driven by a OEM, by a tier one, who said, yeah, that's it, where we would like to provide something. And we prepared a bunch of our analysis. We did workloads, tracing, architectural diagrams, had ideas on how to use STPA. So this was a drawing from the overall high-level item analysis of STPA for the Telltale use case. And you can see, well, even if you have a requester and non-safe requests, this will be repeating elements. You may not have always a display, but it could be that you have speakers. You may have cameras rather than just a CAN signal or Telltale request. Maybe you have some sound part in there. And a lot of elements repeat. So our assumption is that a lot of work which we did for the Telltale warning sign use case is able to be reused. Further plans for 2024, as said, is to acquire a new use case driven by OEM, to also support other communities stronger, to not bring the people always into ELISA, try to get the motion there, but reach out to the other communities. And therefore, we are always open. The first contribution or first request, just a mail away. So you can just sign up for the automotive work group and start the discussion from there. So this is what I wanted to bring in for this part. I guess we can have discussions, proposals on use cases, and get things forward. And of course, there's also different ways to interact and start with all the other parts of the community. So I'm ready for questions, if any. Of course, you can also type them in the chat. There's no need to speak up like we had for the last session.
Okay, I've got one of them. Has there been much interaction with the AutoSAR folk this last year?
No. Yeah, we had some interactions for their safety parts. So they also have the safety work group. We reached out to them. And what we did was also, this is already starting in 2022, we did a little bit of analysis on their requirements, what they put to the system, what are the interfaces. And I guess that's something which we need to ramp up also again in this year, because they also make more stronger collaborations with other initiatives. Interesting part is they much rely on interfaces, giving certain spec parts.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, it's good from the interfacing part. They don't bring the strong use case in there. So this is something which we also just discuss with them. They bring more overall architecture platform to work with. And now they reach out a little more also towards Kvisar and actually also discuss with Eclipse SDV. So I guess it's a good time also to jump on this again and see where we can have value at again.
Yeah, I wonder if it makes sense to bring them in maybe to see about giving us an update where they are as the
Yeah,
webinar, just so that we can all keep
that's good.
coordinating together.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. And to also
Yeah.
see their interaction with the other communities where they kicked it off and where we can support. Yeah, cool, good point. Okay, then I stop sharing, I guess.